Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Service to Savings. I'm your host, Joe, and I'm joined by my colleague, Greg. And we are both MFAA members or the Military Financial Advisors Association. We started this podcast because we get certain questions over and over again. And often we have people that just have that one burning question. And we thought it would be great for MFAA to provide a forum for you to ask that one question and then have us answer it online. These will be posted to both a podcast and to YouTube. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask, go ahead and send it in the comments below any of the episodes, and we'll be sure to add it to one of our future ones to answer it for you. So, Greg, what's our first question today?
All right, Joe, happy to be here. Happy to be talking to everybody for the first time. And we're going to dive into probably the sexiest financial question you could possibly have: emergency funds, right? That's what gets everybody up at night, is cash sitting on the sidelines. But, we always see, well, how much should I have? Where's the best place to put it? And why should I have this at all in low interest rate environments when it could be doing something better, right? Like, literally, I have some people that are like worried that the world's going to burn down and what should I have to keep myself safe? And then I have other people that are like, this is literally burning a hole in my pocket. I have this much money. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, maybe you should invest that. And other times I'm like, no, you actually don't have enough. Let's have this conversation. So it's pretty timely, right? Government shutdown. What are your thoughts on emergency funds? How much is enough?
Definitely timely. And, I retired out of the Coast Guard. So I was on active duty during the last government shutdown where the Coast Guard actually didn't get paid. Greg, you're a Navy veteran, and the Navy so far has not had that in any recent times. But it looks like we may be heading for that first time where DoD joins the Coast Guard and DHS in not getting paid. So timely 100%. Uh, and the cash sitting on the sideline, it is one of those things that I think is very hard sometimes for people to do and realize. And I always remember a story when I first graduated the academy. One of my classmates, she was telling me that she had $10,000 in her checking account that she just ignored and pretended wasn't there. And I was like, $10,000. First off, that was so much money. Like, it kind of blew my
Yeah.
mind, and I couldn't imagine it. And then number two was that she had that much sitting aside and wasn't using it for investments or anything. I kind of regrettably now, made fun of her for that. But, looking back, I was like, man, she was so much smarter than I was.
Right.
So maybe we can start by saying, like, what is an emergency fund for? Is there anything that you use to characterize it, and why should you have it?
Yeah, absolutely. For all of us who serve it, and it's like, it's indifferent across the branches, right? Whether it's Army, Coast Guard, Navy, Space Force. I mean, I think some of the other uniform branches that aren't necessarily Department of Defense oriented, right? It's all about mission readiness and how ready are you to approach that mission. And financial readiness is a major part of the overall strategy. So the way that I think about the emergency fund is kind of like this tiered readiness scale. At least that's the way that I like to frame it, is that there's that quick hit fund where if I can avoid creating debt where now I'm buying now, paying later, and kind of digging this hole. And we all remember from like our entry days where there's just endless talks of payday loans and things like that. I don't know if you remember those, but the quick hit fund, like, we shouldn't have to go to our credit card for everything. Now, I'm not saying credit cards are bad, because you can absolutely gamify the points and get some great benefits. But if that's your only choice, man, you've just lost a lot of opportunity and probably added a lot of stress. So like that quick fix, like that 500 to 1,000 range, is always a good starter. I think you and I would always tell the like cadets and the young college, future officers coming in, that you got to have at least enough for a plane ticket home, right? Like, and that's just a good, easy place to start. The second way that I think about it is like this core fund. Like, when you're a service member, we move around. So you have PCSs. There's the opportunity for, things to get lost. Or some of us were dual income households. Not all of us were. Just imagine not having this cash buffer and something happened to disrupt cash flow while you were on deployment, or your spouse is on deployment. And like, now you're the king of the castle trying to manage these finances. What kind of emotional wreck would you be if that turned off, right? So that's another great reason. I like to have that as that core fund. And then back, because I already alluded to it, was that PCS buffer. That's just that extra 3 months. And I always like to encourage that, listen, things are in flux, things are moving. That's the best opportunity for things to go wrong. So this money is the emergency fund. Like, if I planned for it, it wasn't an emergency. But if it surprises me, now it's an emergency, right? So having that flexibility, though, that optionality is why it's supposed to be on the sidelines and boring.
Yeah, one of the things I've often heard with it is, number one, it's not an investment, it's insurance, right? And so you don't expect to make money off of this, off your insurance, and you shouldn't expect to make money off your emergency fund. You can throw it in a high yield savings account if you want, and keep up with inflation. But that's the way I view it, is you're just keeping up with inflation. And then the other thing with it that I really like to think about it as is it takes that emergency and just makes it an annoyance. You're like, "Oh, you know, yeah, I popped a tire, and by the way, the tires are old enough that I need to actually replace all four, even though I expected they should have lasted another 6 months, but here I am." And all of a sudden you're like, oh, it doesn't matter. I have the money in the bank. I can just buy the new tires, and I'm not trying to cobble something together to drive, my car to work. And so things like that I think are super important. Yeah, was it annoying? Sure. Was it an
Hmm.
emergency anymore? Definitely not. And it takes that stress out. I know with the government shutdown right now, this episode is being taped in the middle of it. And so, that right there, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, it's an emergency now. You're wondering, where's my food going to come from in a week or two, as opposed to it.
That's just right. Like, what's your grocery bill? Out of curiosity, mine's like 500 a week. So just imagine not getting paid for 2 weeks when 59% of Americans can't cover a $1,000 expense.
Yes. Mine's not quite that high simply because most of my kids are gone at college now.
Smart man.
And so, yeah, I don't have the little grown ones anymore that eat like crazies. But yes, it's one of those things. And I think the statistics say, somewhere over half of Americans can't cover an $1,000 emergency. So let's start to talk about like how big, right? You always hear 3 to 6 months, but 3 to 6 months of what?
Sure. So I'm gonna start with this. Like sometimes like you meet people and they just haven't started yet. So that's kind of like the way that I want to frame this in my mind. Like you always hear like 3 to 6 months of living expenses or 3 to 6 months of income. And me, I always defer to the expenses portion. Like what am I actually going to spend? Because that's what I'm replacing. And depending on where you're at in your stage of life, like you kind of also want to be able to protect your ability to keep saving, right? So you got to phase up to it. So, like, what does that look like? How do you get there? Uh, and I'm thinking about the junior enlisted, like the E1s through E4s. 23% of those have less than 1 month savings. So, if we stopped getting paid, and Navy and Federal and USAA and all the banks that work with us a lot, we're not affiliated with them, but work with us in terms of like we typically bank there as a community. They've been pretty great and gracious through all of the government shutdowns that I've ever known that said, hey, if there's an interruption, we'll keep kind of paying you like front loaded because we know that you'll get it eventually. Um, but that's kind of like a nice to have. That's not a promise set in stone. Like it didn't come down from on high and say this is how it's going to work. So if you cut off a month of savings, like I don't actually matter what your base rate is. It's well, what's in your bank account? What can I go and spend? Can I go buy those groceries? Can I buy the gas so that I can actually get to the base on time so I don't get in trouble? Can I pay for the daycare if there wasn't room in the on base facilities? Like there's all of these just necessary things that make up that gap. So you need to build up to 3 to 6 months of your living expenses. Like what does it actually cost? And I mean, as a bare minimum, you got to think of like that minimum dignity floor. If I'm not living on base housing, I got to pay rent, right? Or I got to pay my mortgage. I got to pay my car payment. Otherwise, they take away my car, and that gets us back to mission readiness. How am I going to get to work? So that's the way I think about it, is replacing those funds. And I always shoot for the 3 to 6 month. The way I've justified it is I've been married for a while, so I always think about my household and my family that way. And if I were deployed right now, the actual number one risks that I found was not so much the government stopping my pay or a PCS problem. It's what happens if my civilian counterpart changes job in that mix. That actually is one of the biggest stressors of that civilian side job change that stresses military families.
Because there's often an interruption, right? When you go to PCS, that, you know, they may not be able to work for a month simply because you're moving, or it may be multiple months because they had a job interruption and haven't found a new job yet, or are underemployed at their new job. And so not earning up to their full potential. And so, those that emergency fund can help bridge that over for you until everything gets settled. 3 to 6 months living expenses. I also like to, you may take on some extra risk in your life, and that may up your need for an emergency fund, right? So, for instance, if you own a house, my wife's judge of is our emergency fund big enough is can I replace the roof? For some reason, that is her thing, right? He's like, if the roof leaks, it is an emergency and I need it replaced tomorrow. And so that's her judge of if our emergency fund is big enough. But 3 to 6 months of expenses hopefully is enough to replace the roof if you own the house. But you want to keep things like that in mind. If you're stationed in Louisiana and own a house, the AC going out is a bona fide emergency. Like you need to get that thing up and running that day, if not sooner. And so you just really want to keep that in mind. Like, do you have enough money on hand to be able to make that happen?
Yeah, and you often get like pushback of the 3 to 6 month number where like, well, why can't I just have 1 month? I've never been out of a job for longer than a month. Or what government shutdown? I'm just going to keep leading into that. Has ever lasted longer than the month in terms of like furloughs and stopgaps and things like that. And you might be right, but it's kind of like Murphy's law. Like if something can go wrong, when's the best time for it to go wrong? When everything else is hitting the fan as well. You know what I mean? So it's always great to have that huge buffer. And those with emergency funds have significantly less stress, which makes you better able to handle things that come up. Maybe based on your income or your spouse's income and what the whole family dynamic looks like is you could have flexibility. Like none of this is like a law that says thou shall have 3 to 6 months, but having that conversation and picking an appropriate buffer is super important. Maybe if you're in the guard or you're a reservist, maybe you need to check your ego and be a little bit more conservative, especially since they're the community with the highest income volatility, specifically the reserve components with about 40% more moderate to severe financial stress during any sort of mobilization gap.
And stress is really a big picture of this, right? Most of our jobs in the military are already stressful enough. And so if we can lower that stress level somehow, and an emergency fund is a good way to do that. Empower had some great research on that, basically saying that, a good emergency fund causes about 25% less stress on a family. And so, that's not an insignificant amount of stress reduction for everyone, and it can come fairly easily by setting that up for you. So I guess, did you have any other thoughts on emergency funds?
I mean, maybe we could start. We could tease like a little action list for listeners. Like, well, if I'm behind, or how do I get this started, or where should it be, or how do we grow? Like, maybe we have a little bit, and we
I
want
would
more.
was
What do
thinking
you
the
think?
same thing. And so, a good starting point, right, is that plane ticket home, right? Or another way of saying that is probably about $1,000 in cash in a checking account. And ideally, you want to separate that out from your primary checking so that you know that it's set aside and there all the time. You can do that into a high yield savings account, or you can do it into just a normal checking account if you want, just off to the side. After that, you want to start building towards your 3 to 6 months of emergency fund. And ideally, right, what you do is just track what you spend in a month, add that up. If there's anything that's extravagant or extra that month, like for instance, if you replace the tires on your car, that probably doesn't need to be in that month's spending. Subtract that out, multiply it by three, and there you go. Often you can just simply add up 3 months and it'll kind of average itself out. And while you're at the low side on 3 months, even if there is that extra big purchase, you're still well under the 6 months. And so that'll get you
Well, we
there.
don't need analysis paralysis either, right? Like, this isn't an exercise in precision. You just want an approximate buffer.
Right. Round numbers are perfectly good here. If you say I'm spending $3,000 a month or I'm spending $5,000 a month, honestly, probably both those numbers are fine, if that's your monthly budget. You probably don't, the difference between having 9 and 15, while significant, kind of in the bank account, is still in that 3 to 6 months frame there for you, no matter which one is the right one. And then, finally, make sure that you check it every once in a while and make sure that it's still really accurate on your 3 to 6 months of living expenses. Because over time, hopefully, you're getting promoted or advanced and making a little bit more money. And with that comes a little bit of an increase in lifestyle, which means your emergency fund may need to also be updated.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think that's actually probably one of the easiest ways that you can scale this too with your lifestyle is, as you said, with every promotion or every BAH increase, set aside that automatic allotment that's maybe tied to like 3 to 5% of your BAH or something. That way it grows with you. I'm a firm believer, especially in the finance space, that the whole point of this is income. Like our savings right now is really just delayed spending. It's like doing a stores load before you get on deployment. I'm going to eat that food. That hard pack is waiting for me. All you submariners in the ice cream world know that that's gold. But we got to prepare for that. We're putting it aside so that we have that future spending. So make that the habit and know that as we grow and as we advance, we're probably going to want to spend more because we've earned it. Okay, let's prepare for that. We don't want to disrupt it if something goes sideways. Let's have that buffer in place. And obviously, just good family safety, check and reevaluate before you PCS or before you deploy.
Yep. And one thing to remember too is as soon as you get that first $1,000 put away into that bank account, you're already better than 50% of Americans. Now we want you to be in that top 10% and get the full 3 to 6 months, but $1,000 gets you better than half your colleagues out there, half your fellow citizens. So to sum up, emergency funds, start with that baby emergency fund, get that $1,000 set aside, build towards the 3 to 6 months, use any pay raises that you get to help advance that a little quicker, and then make sure that you evaluate it periodically. A PCS move or a pay raise is a great time to go back and check.
And if you're living, just like a side note on that, if you've got that 3 to 6 months, but a PCS is coming, or you're at the end of your service obligation, you're about to retire or you're about to transition into your honeymoon career, that's when I would recommend, why not have just a little extra buffer, right? I mean, I understand that you might be on terminal leave and you might have like these double dips in pay, but that's not guaranteed. Why not buy yourself some time to transition with grace and power, right?
Yes.
And that's why 3 to 6 months is the going rate or going optimal. But sometimes maybe you want more. Maybe you want 9 or a year. Pre-retirees, I tell them 1 to 2 years. So just the transition out of military retirement at like 20 or something. What's an extra 3 months?
If you liked what you heard, subscribe to our podcast for exclusive financial tips and updates tailored to military members, military spouses, and veterans. With these strategies designed for service members, you can achieve financial success. And as your career and success grow, bringing complexity to your finances like BRS, deployments, and allowances, work with a Military Financial Advisors Association member to navigate that complexity. Visit militaryfinancialadvisors.org to get started. Thanks for tuning in and see you next time.
The information provided on Service to Savings, the Military Financial Advisors Association's podcast, is for general informational and educational purposes only. Nothing contained in this podcast should be construed as financial, investment, legal, or tax advice, nor is it intended to be an endorsement or recommendation of any specific product, service, or investment strategy. Always consult with a certified financial planning professional, preferably an MFAA member, before making any financial decisions, as your personal circumstances, including military benefits, TSP contributions, deployment-related finances, or retirement planning may require tailored advice.